Morning. Having a little trouble getting my audio going here, but I think I'm ready to go and rock and roll now. Hi, this is Rich Bernardo, and it's well, almost a quarter to 10 in the morning of all places. What's today, Wednesday? And actually, you will have, I'm not sure when this video will be going up, but I will remind you that I guess it's not even worth bringing it up. I was going to say that I am going to have an optional extra help uh, session at 4:30 p.m. this afternoon. And I don't know how many of you will see this by that point, and it's really not even all that relevant to what the afternoon meeting is about. So I'm wasting your time and mine. Uh, this is a content video. It's not an assignment video. I'm going to do another assignment video after I do this content video, and perhaps do yet another content video, depending how ambitious I am. I also have a book deadline I'm trying to complete. So at any rate, we're about, well, already halfway through the course in a certain sense. This video is for the content associated with the week of June 25th. Now, if we wait till if I were to put this up this coming Sunday, which I think is the 25th, then you would be probably through your school semester, I assume, at that point. Sometimes I don't pay attention to when school actually ends, but I think I do know that it ends this week for a number of reasons associated with grandchildren. So I'm hope that you're ready to rest up and get through what we need to do here, and perhaps squeeze more time towards getting your assignments and align with the content that we're trying to get across as well. And so again, I'm just kind of running off at the mouth and wasting not my time so much, but certainly yours. So I apologize for that, and let me get going, for heaven's sakes. So here we go. Share screen, bring up Microsoft Word. Okay, you will notice that this is the agenda. I'll post this too, this print copy, but you can certainly see this, and we'll go backwards, forwards. Now, in truth, I haven't looked that closely at the discussion questions. That's tomorrow's job, and so you'll see a lot of responses from me on that count starting tomorrow. But in the beginning, in the end, at any rate, really, what we will have come through by the time this video is pertinent, which again will be as of the week of the 25th, as of this coming Sunday. Today being the 23rd, I think, 21st, first day of summer. The you will have gotten your arms more nearly around, plus having watched the June 18th video, you will have gotten your arm around the content word. I'm sorry, the culture word. And that word is going to ring your bell for the rest of the semester and beyond, I would hope. Because in the end, what we're talking about is, as Peter Drucker, who is a famous organizational author, leadership author, says, culture eats strategy for breakfast. It's always about the culture in the end. If you don't get your handle around what the culture is about and decide what you need to do about it one way or another, you cannot possibly effect the kinds of changes that need to be effected and sustain the good things that may be in place to meet the needs of, first of all, the children whom you serve, and as well as the staff who serves them and the community. And so it's all about understanding the culture. I'm always thrilled when a student emails me or calls me and says, Dr. B, I got a job. Thank you for getting me a reference and so forth. I'm thrilled to do that as often as I'm asked. And the next thing I would say to them is two things, actually. One is know the culture. I don't care if you've worked here for 30 years. Know the culture, because now you're using a different lens, a set of lenses to see it from the 50,000-foot level, and need to know that. Now, the other piece of it too is, if you're a stranger from a strange land, if you've been brought in, for example, to change the culture, How can you change the culture if you don't know what the culture is about? Hence the Shine piece that we spoke about, Edgar Schein, giving you videos to look at. I've given you the diagram with the triangle, and I'm going to keep referring to that as we move along. The second thing I say to a newly appointed administrator is pay it forward, which has nothing to do necessarily with this piece of the class, although I will cite this later on as we get to the back part of the course, where you have someone nurtured you somehow, either inspired you to go get a position because you wanted to kind of replicate what they do. Hopefully that would be the case, or in some cases, become an administrator to, I think one of you said this to me actually, to not do what they do, to to change how people can be approached and influenced to want to build the bond together, so to speak. And so those are the two things that we'll talk about. We have spoken about for the moment. So yes, we are back in culture. It's chapter 7 of my text. Again, I'm going with the newest edition, which may not be in total alignment with the book that you've gotten. But I urge you to read that chapter. It's a pretty good chapter that I would suggest you internalize altogether. And with that, let's get into a number of goals today. And here they are on the agenda as we go through each of the chapters. So you see, I'm trying to do 3 chapters today, really 2 in truth. And you'll see, as I mentioned last week, I think, that you will also see occasionally that, more than occasionally, see it throughout the rest of the semester. I'll go back to a chapter we've already covered. So I don't like that word covered, but it's an easy verb to use sometimes. And so chapter 7 is about culture, and we're back in culture, and we're taking it from a number of different corners. Now, had we been synchronously meeting, I would have challenged you with this question, or perhaps put it to you, and I may yet in some sort of discussion question, which I haven't posted. I don't think I'll do that for that. I will post discussion questions, but not necessarily about this as such. Remember now, you put in artifacts to each other, and again, in cyberspace, you looked at someone else's artifact, and you speculated, you theorized, conjectured, you guessed at what the cultures may represent. And I did too with a couple of them. I had some fun with that. And now, since we've come through what I would call the big reveal, that is to say, people now say, well, this is what this telephone meant, that we communicate electronically, but not so well publicly. I don't know, but that's just the first thing that came to my mind as I was looking for artifacts to demonstrate. I'm holding in my hand now, I don't know if you can see it, something I got in Disney World in the Galaxy's Edge, and if you haven't used it in a while, and the battery's dead, but it talks to you. And it talks about whether you're a good guy or a bad guy. I man, did I have to charge it up again. At any rate, that's an artifact of a planet that from the Star Wars universe that I can barely understand. But I'm happy to have 4 grandsons who explain it to me well. It sounds sexist, but my granddaughters could care less. But my grandsons are certainly very much involved with it. And so here's the point I'm trying to make. The question I asked myself as I tried to work with you on really recognizing the role that culture plays in all parts and all aspects of what your school district is all about. What does it look like for you as a leader with or without the knowledge that you need to recognize the tenets that you need to understand? I'm going to hit this drum a lot. Okay, this is the first time I'm raising it from this framework, but it does. This is really so much of how all of what your leadership decisions are going to be grounded in. So let's look at it from that point of view. What does it look like with a good knowledge of your culture or without it? It's pretty clear, but what's more important is that you see that what they also tried to do, I'm going to try to color this and see if I can get away with that. Yeah, I could do that. So let's color these things. Let's look at it from going with the row left to right. Your knowledge of culture when you have a clear and universal grasp of the basic assumptions of how that culture exists, why it exists, what its purpose is that it truly believes. Way down deep, not something that they wear on their sleeve necessarily without without any more than lip service, which is sometimes what we sometimes encounter, don't we? So what does it look like in terms of three dimensions? I'm going to add another dimension uh, next week. But the three dimensions are yellow, green, and blue. All right. We'll call yellow decision making. There's no symbol to that. And green for something, word I've used a few times. I'm going to hit much harder across the next several weeks. Futuring, which has all to do with the APA assignment that you're constructing, and systems, which I've hit in the on the last week's agenda, and haven't. So we're going to assume that you've worked with that already. So when you have clear knowledge of what your culture is about, decision making is structured and values based. You're not going to do something, and I'll give you a negative example of that just occurred to me. You're not going to do something that is counter to your values in terms of a decision, because then the decision doesn't work. It doesn't satisfy, maybe is a better word, your needs. Here's a decision I made several years ago that I am not particularly proud of. Looking back, it was budget time, and we were looking under rocks for any penny we could save. So the superintendent knew I was a spender and not a saver when it came to spending the taxpayers' money. As the assistant superintendent for curriculum, I felt that I didn't need to worry about that. It was my job to provide programs and support to the staff that would give me every kid's needs in every way possible. And that's it. And I still haven't given that up. But I did drop the ball here for my own values to some extent. And superintendent wouldn't budge. And he said, I need to have you give me something. All right. And I said, okay. I said, you know what? We have an alternative high school program. Now, the alternative high school was a night school approach. There's several ways to approach alternative high schools. Our approach was an in-house program where the district teachers would work extra, quite frankly, work it early in the early evening, and we would run classes to help the kids who were having trouble adjusting to the so-called mainstream day for one reason or another. And there were all kinds of reasons for that. Every single one of them was legitimate. Sometimes we put the kid there if the kid was a disruptive kid, but that wasn't the first purpose of it at all. It was to merely provide an alternative way for students to complete their diplomas. And I was never totally satisfied with it. The model that I wanted to put in place got shot down several years before that. And that's another complicated story. Well, actually, before I became the assistant superintendent. And what we had was a kind of ramshackle, pasted together thing. And it really was a thing where teachers taught in the evening, were paid per section that they taught. Kids showed up, again, at that time of the night or in the early evenings, a better way to put it, and take the courses that they weren't taking during the day. And if they passed it, we would, the courses were rigorous. It wasn't like we were giving them golden books and coloring books to do. They were doing work with the support of the teachers who were delivering the instruction. But it could have been so much more. It just could have been much more. And so the superintendent said to me, give me something. So I said, I tell you what, I said, I'll give you the alternative high school. And he kind of looked surprised. We were surprised for a moment. He says, you, that was your baby. I said, it was my baby, but this is not my baby. This is not what I like. I'm not thrilled with how this is set up. I would want to redo it. So we could probably put it on hold for, I think I said a year, and we could do another study on it, and then we could reinstitute it. And he said, okay. So we took it out of the budget. Kids were affected by that. I want to say 20 or 25 students. We found other ways, for the most part, for them to satisfy their graduation requirements. Some ways better, I thought, but it was certainly a ramshackle, fly by the seat of your pants approach, not what I was comfortable with. And the program never really came back. Now, I should have futured for that to come to the blue dimension for a moment, but I did not. And what I really did was violate my own values. I don't think I realized it. Had I realized it, I guess I did realize it, and I had to do what I was told to do. And I'm not proud of that. Okay, but there's an example of when you have a clear grasp of the decision making, you generally adhere to the values that you have embraced. So I gave you a negative example of that. I could give you plenty of the opposites. And I kind of wish I'll think of one before maybe we finish, or at least maybe perhaps in next week's video. Again, if you have good knowledge of your culture, then you would also recognize, again, how your decision making is cleaner, crisper, so forth. And you also can see, looking at the green column, that you're committed to the future. Because you can't make decisions. I'm going to talk about this in a moment. You can't make decisions without committing to recognizing what your values are, and then deciding what the future is that you want. These are two words I'm going to use. I'm not sure if I've used it yet, but they will be repeated. He smiled. Probable versus preferable futures. Probable versus preferable. Sit down, you read the tea leaves, you look at what's going on in your district economically, politically, culturally, academically, socially, any way you possibly can. You have your arms around the information that comprises a decision that is and generates from your cultural basic assumptions and beliefs. You know that. And now you've got to figure out, well, what's our preferable futures? You have a body of, I'm going to hold my hand up. Let's say we have 5 probable futures that we're looking at. I'll give an example in a minute. But there's only 1 or 2 that really are preferable. So let's think out loud. A probable future. Probable future is that the DEI issues that we're going to come to next week pretty strongly. The DEI, the diversity, equity, and inclusion issues, are going to continue to be a priority. That's a probability. It's a strong probability. A probability that generates from that is that, hey, in the end, we have to figure out ways to assess whether we are meeting those needs, and why we are, why we not, or why we are not. And if we want a preferable future to generate from that, we have to construct, with the help of our community, with the help of our staff, probably some professional support from the outside, to retool what we do to make sure that we are, in fact, giving every student an equitable chance to succeed. That we're not leaving kids out, not getting. It's another probable future. A probable future is you're going to get pushback. Look at the pushback, and I'm not going to comment on it politically, although I have an opinion about it. How many school districts are are under the gun to give up mascots or names, nicknames, and so forth for the district that seem to be in violation of uh, respecting Indigenous Americans' needs or how we perceive them. Now, you may not like the idea that we change the Cleveland Indians to the Cleveland Guardians. It may bother you a lot. Uh, but in my mind, well, I'm trying to be careful here. I'll tell you, in my mind, it's really it's a symbol that means something to folks. But in the end, it's really not about whether there's a Native American wearing a headdress so much as portraying a Native American wearing a headdress as some source of ridicule. And we can go on and on about this, but that's an issue of diversity and maybe even inclusion nowadays. Certainly diversity that's got people riled up. And the state education department is digging in pretty cleanly on this, saying no, you're going to have to you're going to have if you've got to change it, and that's violating some people's cultural values and assumptions until they really get underneath it. And I'm not going to take the time to do that in a one-sided unilateral lecture for me. We were all in a big classroom together. I'd be happy to do that. But the futuring piece here is the ability to forecast which of the probable futures you want based on alignment with the culture and its values and its just basic assumptions. Now, by the way, the basic assumptions of a culture don't necessarily have to be proper. They could be distorted. They could be misinformed. They could be out of line. They use another word. In which case, you as district leader has to get people to pay attention to that. Let's go back to the beginning for a minute. So if you've got a clear knowledge of your culture, your decision making is fine. Well, it's not perfect, but it's certainly more effective than if it were not. If you know what your futuring expectations are and how to achieve those, a la an APA, he smiled, then you're committed to its importance of getting your preferable futures to occur. And you're more likely than not, your systems are aligned. By systems, I mean your instructional staff needs supported, buildings, you have all the materials and resources that you need and so forth. Everything's lined up to meet what the culture has laid the foundation for. Now you go down to the next row, and it sort of speaks for itself. If you've got little knowledge about or less regard for the culture, right away you're in dangerous territory. Doesn't mean you can't go in there and change it. This means you have to be tiptoe through the tulips and understand how to get folks to change their realization of what this may be all about. And so if you don't have a knowledge of your culture, your decision making is scattered and ungrounded, conflicting. If you don't know much about your cultural variables, but you can't really future. You're just going to ping pong from one thing to the next. So at best, you're short-sighted. And your systems probably aren't in alignment. Message being the sum, the SUM of this little chart is the more you recognize the components of your culture, the more nearly you can affect the changes that you want, because you know where you stand and where you don't. Now, it's clear enough to understand. It's clear enough to understand where your the superintendent's role is. The superintendent is the point person. And that's the one who takes the slings and arrows more often than not, because the superintendent is, I'm being kind of crude about it, is being paid to do those things. And that's what the job is. And the people who work with the superintendent in your central office are folks who are presumably in line with that. Now, that's all well and good. I point to page 203 in the text because I think it's got a pretty good description of some of the issues that I'm alluding to here without reading it back at you. You have the book. But let's talk about assessing. How do you assess a culture? It's not that easy. And sometimes, and it's not something you do with the snap of a finger. So I'm just going to open up this YouTube for a moment. I expect you to watch it on your. Well, no, here's what we're going to do. I want you to score this. Okay? I want you to score it for yourself. Right? Obviously, I won't know what your numbers are, but I want you to give yourself numbers on this one. So on a scale of 1 to 5, and so I'll stop the video as we go through it.
This changes everything we know about tinnitus. Neurologists have found that tinnitus wipes your memory.
Hi, I'm Dr. Rick Goodman, leadership expert, keynote speaker, and author of the book, The Solutions-Oriented Leader. Today, I'm going to share with you my 10 best questions for assessing your organizational culture. Now, make sure you watch until the end, and please like and subscribe to our channel for the latest leadership tips. Now, in order to assess your organizational culture, to make changes, it's important to develop questions that will point you in the right direction. And I know these 10 questions for assessing your culture will put you on the right track. Now, what's difficult sometimes is defining your organizational culture, putting a finger on what makes it distinct. With that said, I think this quick questionnaire can be vital for just getting you started to think critically about what your organizational culture is and how it might be improved. So what is organizational culture? The way I explain it is it's a summary of how people at your business interact with each other.
Now, you hear the word business. I've already mentioned this to you before. You hear the word business and you understand that business theorists, the organizational people, a good 10 years in front of educators on this. That's a commentary. If I had you in a doctoral class, we could explore. So you hear the word business, but these things all apply to education. If they don't, we'll just move on.
And how they interact with clients and customers. More formally, you might say that organizational culture is a mixture of beliefs, assumptions, values, and habits that comprise the psychological environment of your workplace. Organizational culture comes in different varieties, and some are healthier than others. So how do you assess your company's culture? Well, that's what we're going to address here. So here are my 10 best questions for assessing your organizational culture. Number 1, what is the mission or purpose of your organization? Is this mission statement written in some way for people to view? Would you say that most team members can articulate the mission? Or if you ask 10 different employees what the mission is, would you get 10 different answers?
Now, sometimes you don't want to know the answer to that if you're a leader, but that's an important question. So on a scale of 1 to 5, again, we're not turning this in, it's not a test. On a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 meaning absolutely everybody knows the mission. We walk around, we all have it tattooed on the back of our hand. To 1 backwards down to 1 where nobody knows what the mission is. Where are you? Not you, but where is your district? How do you perceive that?
Number 2, what motivates your employees? Are team members motivated into action by a sense of mission, or by a promise of reward, or a threat of corrective action?
This always kind of astounds me, this whole point. Remember now, this is a business context, but I'm always kind of shocked when a school employee will say to me, well, we are really kind of fearful of challenging something like this. We'll get in trouble. I really can't even fathom that in my own experience. I've never seen that. I don't think I have anyway. But in the end, there is that out there. So, however, when you think about it from the nonprofit point of view, nonprofit organizational point of view, you're not making a profit. If you make a bad choice, 99 times out of 100, you're not punished for it. You're not sent to go stand in the corner, or you get docked X amount of pay. It doesn't work that way in school systems as it may in some businesses, or you get a demotion or anything like that. But there is some kind of retribution um, or reward if you have something to say about whether or not you recognize what the mission is. That's that question for me. What do you think? 1 to 5, same premise.
What's the motivating force at your company? Number 3, what's the organizational structure? Would you say that the structure of your company is one of top-down decision-making? Or is it more of a flat structure where team members all feel like they're on pretty much the same footing?
Now, we've already talked about this several times, and you're interviewing your district people as we speak, right? So you're getting a feel for it. I'm sure you're getting a top-down feel. Raise your antenna and see if to the extent to which you hear a flattened approach. On Monday, you're not going to hear it too often, but on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 meaning it's flattened and 1 meaning it's totally top down, where do you think your district sits?
And how does this structure impact your daily productivity and employee relationships? Number 4, is your company overall collaborative? How often do different departments work together with one another? Especially on a typical project, is
Always astounded by this response, especially those of you in secondary. You're very rarely encouraged. And I'm smiling, but I really want to frown, throw things when I see this. The mindset that English can't collaborate with math, the mindset that social studies can't collaborate with science, it's absurd. But that's how we live. That's how we compartmentalize things because it's simple. It's not necessarily effective to promote a whole student, but it's simpler. And what we do is we really do work out of silos more often than not. So 5 is, yeah, we do try to collaborate as often as we can. And not this lip service thing stuff. I'm talking about real academic in this case, exchange and co-planning versus one where everyone's I'll give you a quick thing. This once said to me when I was a principal. I had a fantastic second grade teacher. We didn't always get along, but she was, I mean, if I had a child in my own school, my child would be in her class in the second grade because this lady could teach. She was everything. She's a good lady all the way around with kids. At any rate, she came in one day, she closed the door, and I said, oh, she's going to give me one of her lectures. And sure enough, she said, she says, you think like a secondary person. Now, I did not like that. I took a little umbrage at that, kind of super sensitive about it. I was a principal of an elementary school, although I was born in secondary settings. But I was born in a secondary setting where collaboration was the expectation, not the exception. And so when she said you think like a secondary person, I kind of got my shoulders up a little bit. I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Well, I'm a second grade teacher. I don't worry about what these children learn in first grade, and I'm not worried about what they're going to learn in third. I'm only worried about what I do with my 20 kids in this building, in this classroom for this year. They can get them as prepared as I can. But I'm not interested in trying to, or even interested in talking to her fellow second grade teachers about maybe sharing some things." And I said, what, then I have failed. I said to her, if I can't get you to recognize that we have a common vision of everyone trying to get better, even though we're very good, which it was a very good building, not because I was a principal, it's a good building when I got there. So I don't take any credit for that, but I will say that that mindset really scared me and I have to say, she was at least had the courage to tell me that. And I didn't punish her. I listened. I swear.
Does one employee hold up in their office, or do you see a lot of instances of teamwork and cross-disciplinary
So 5 is teamwork, cross-disciplinary thinking.
unity? Number 5, do people in your company feel respected and appreciated? Actually start with yourself. Do you feel respected by both people who work under you and by the people to whom you report? Do colleagues appreciate your particular skills and subject matter expertise? Do you feel like you have opportunities to add value, and is that value welcomed and appreciated by the rest of the team?
The research is really clear about this, especially the growing research. I kind of alluded to this in the first night out, I think. It's all about relationships. And relationships are what stir an organization to step up and work with each other and rally around the flag if that's necessary as well. It's all about relationships. And so the schools that are don't research is clear on this. They don't have good relationships among staff and as among the leadership are the ones that don't perform as well. Now, I'm reading number 6 off the bottom of the screen. Oh, by the way, so let's say score yourself on the fifth one. So to the extent to which the relationships are very good, all the way down to no, there's no good relationships here. And number 6 is, are you encouraged to take risks?
Number 6, is there freedom to fail with new initiatives? What happens if a team member tries something innovative, new, and it doesn't quite work out as intended? Is punitive action taken? Is that employee scolded by the boss? Or do you have a work environment where effort and experimentation are rewarded and encouraged even when things don't quite pan out? Number 7.
This is a little tricky as far as this was concerned. I mean, the textbook answer is, of course, yeah, no, creativity is absolutely encouraged in every place, manner, and form. And there's a but at the end of my sentence. And the sentence, my but would be that you can't. I mean, this is a silly example. When I ran a faculty meeting once, and when I was a principal, I said something like, I read some research that said if you hang the children by their toenails upside down, reading scores will go up. And I was making a joke. And the next day, I had Mrs. Welch come running to me. She was giving me the joke back. She didn't do it, but she says, Mr. Bernardo, I tried to hang the kids by their toenails, but they wouldn't let me. So my scores are going to go down. And we both laughed. But really, what we're driving at is there are certain innovations you just can't do with students, with people. The kids aren't guinea pigs. If you're going to put a creative piece together, then you as the leader has a responsibility to be sure that the people who are creating these new ideas are encouraged to the hilt. But we've also assured ourselves that we're not hurting kids. We do that anyway, quite frankly. I mean, as assistant superintendent, we threw out the basal readers and the phonics and all of that. And we had all this research to go Columbia reading programs and so on. And now there's research from the same people who developed the Columbia reading programs saying, maybe we shouldn't have gone so far. Happily, I listened to some of my reading specialists that said, you can't go full blast on this. There's certain phonics things we have to do here. Dr. Bernard and I said, okay, let's make sure we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. So that's a little bit tricky, but I would say, are you encouraged to be creative? The extent to which you as a teacher feel as though it's okay for you to try to be creative within the context of whatever your task may be.
How does employee morale impact the end client experience? This is a tough one to assess, but think about the general mood of your employees. Does it seem like their attitude carries over into friendly, attentive, courteous customer service? Or do you notice that lackluster attitude leads to a chilly demeanor with your customers?
Yeah, skip that one. I don't know how that works out. So that one kind of bores me. We'll keep going.
Number 8, how would you characterize leadership at your company? Leadership and culture go hand in hand. I'd encourage you to ask whether the managers, bosses, supervisors, or executives at your company lead by example. Or do they micromanage? Are they good at delegation? Does the company trust employees with some real autonomy and freedom? You need to ask.
Yeah, you need to ask that, or tell yourself what you feel. I mean, we could talk about this. One of these people who thinks they are they're the answer to everybody's prayers for everything. And yeah, the research, I have to stop things because yeah, I apologize for that. I had to take the phone call. Otherwise, I would never get that person again, and you wouldn't know it, but I was gone from you for at least a half hour. And hopefully this recording will pick up from where we are. I said, no, I have to remember what we were talking about. We were looking at that video, weren't we? I don't know if we remember no, we did not. Let me go back to that. I want to discuss the last part of that video, and then we'll go back to each other.
Kate Osborne. Train, educate, and engage your employees with.
Hi, I'm Dr. Rick Goodman, leadership expert, keynote speaker, and author of the
Seen this
book, The
part already.
Solutions
We got to
Oriented
go
Leader.
forward.
Today I'm going to share with you my 10 best questions for assessing your organization. General mood of your employees. Does it seem like their attitude carries over into friendly, attentive, courteous customer service? Number 8, how would you characterize leadership at your company? Leadership and culture go hand in hand. I'd encourage you to ask whether the managers, bosses, supervisors, or executives at your company lead by example. Or do they micromanage? Are they good at delegation? Does the company trust employees with some real autonomy and freedom? You need to ask that question. Number 9, can you name 3 specific areas where organizational culture could be improved? I know it's a simple question, but it's crucial. No company culture is ever perfect. It's always going to be a work in progress, and thinking critically about specific areas for improvement can be really helpful.
This is a great point, right? This is exactly what I'm asking you to do. Is to consider what Dr. Goodman is offering up here. Can you see issues or deficits? So if you're taking your pulse right now with these so-called 10 characteristics, notwithstanding the fact we skipped one, this is a healthy thing to do. Now the question isn't, that's kind of a smug question, arrogant question, professor nerd question is, have you ever been asked to offer up these kinds of assessments, self-evaluations of your district culture? Has anyone ever asked you these things before? If they haven't, what does that say about the culture?
What are a few things that immediately spring to your mind? And do you think other team members would share your assessment? And number 10, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate your organizational culture? Would you recommend it to a friend? Again, this may sound simple, but I think there's real value in just doing a quick gut check. How much do you like your organizational culture? Really? Your instincts may be more revealing than you can imagine. I believe with these 10 questions, you are well on.
These are some good questions. These are some pretty good questions, I think. Hopefully, I'm not sure if you saw the video. You have the video link that you can look at on your own, except it's just a talking head like myself. And hopefully you've heard it. You should be able to respond to it. But notwithstanding that's a good way to think about how you recognize the role, the underlying, permeating, all-embracing role the culture plays in all of what a district organization or a building, for that matter, but the building that's representative of the whole with a W takes you through. So assessing is really pretty important. And really then, as Dr. Goodman pointed out, to decide where it takes you next. Now, the next piece of that would be, is it futures-based? I'm going to save that for next week. Keep hearing that word from me. I think the word is self-evident. How oriented is it towards the future? And I'll have a lot of fun with you over the balance of this course, having you think that way. And the answer is no and yes, yes and no. And I'm not being a wise person when I say that. Every year around this time of the year, though, it's I guess at least a little more than a month since most of the budget votes went through. I see today that there were two budget votes left on Long Island, and one was in Wainscott, which is all the way out by Montauk. That went down, and so they'll be working from an austerity budget, and the other one was in West Hempstead when that went through. But if you're in the city, you can't relate to this all that well because the school budget's hidden in among the city budget. But when you talk about the suburbs, each district has its own budget vote. And the budget vote purportedly, I can never say that word very well, purportedly speaks to the future, but not really, he shouted with a frustrating tone. It speaks to next year. That's future, I'll give you that, but it's not the future. The future is out there. And I'm not talking about X-Files. We're talking about the future is out there. Now, one interesting point to consider is that we are not very good, we human beings are not very good at that. We're not very good at, I can see I'm not sharing. I could just realize that. Let's go back and make sure I'm doing that. There we go. So the futures-based piece is down here below assessment. As I started to say, that human beings are not really capable of thinking much more than 10 years out. Doesn't mean you can't think 10 years, more than 10 years out, but it's difficult. We have trouble with that. I'm not sure why our brains are wired that way or how we've been raised to think much past that. Although I do understand, and we'll talk more about this next week too, certain cultures are more futures-based than the American culture is. And in the same time, certain cultures are even more rigid than we are. And on whole, with a W, the Americans are now people, they're present people, and don't have any patience for the future, and are doomed to be faced by a future they haven't always prepared for very well. And the good district leader has to change that orientation, that mindset, to make our district a futures-based one. Now, we'll get to that as the semester continues. These other two videos, they're short, but they're also good. Simon Sinek, S-I-N-E-K. Yeah, it's a very refreshing spokesperson. He's got a million videos if you choose to take a look at some of them. The one I sampled for you is about things to look at when you want to get a change off the ground. And again, we're going to come back to that over the next couple of weeks, but I just wanted to get that acorn in the ground for you. And there's the Shine video, which Shine is who's the author of the organizational culture model that I espouse. And not the only model, by the way, but the model I espouse that that's actually, I guess you could say, a kind of anthropological point of view. So that you can see from his lens, even that much more closely. So I'm expecting that you'll take a look at that. And pages 209 and 210 would have you analyze decision-making through that as well. And so the discussion question, I think it's up already, I have to check, is after watching this video and after scoring your district's culture, tell me what happens. Go with that and we move to the next place. Which brings me to the next chapter, and I'll probably stop here. And that brings us to the next chapter, which is about decision-making, and about which form of decision-making dominates your thinking, your district's culture. Okay? I'm just going to point the video out to you. I'm not going to play it.
I came up with. Now, education has not been particularly good at looking at organisational management. Politics is the area that talks about decision-making very succinctly, as to other areas, but I've stuck with the political because it is.
Okay, that's a nice introductory video. Now, that video comes from a frame. We haven't spoken about Bowman and Deal yet. I have to figure out a way to get Bowman and Deal into this conversation. In fact, let me put that here so I don't forget to do it. I'm not going to explain Bowman and Deal right today. Bowman and Deal talk about how you look at an organization, whatever the organization is, the Boy Scouts, the Girl Scouts, your church, your family, schools, the government through four lenses. And one of them is the political frame, and that's what that professor is talking about in that particular video. But essentially, she's also talking about the kinds of culture that decision making that's out there, and more specifically, I'm just pointing out, and these are described pretty well in the um, in the text. There's any number of pieces: classical, mixed scanning, muddling along. Future space comes back, and I'm throwing your time. I'm going to highlight for a moment. And what I would call flat decision making. Now, what that means, I'm going to go to well, let me talk about scanning. All right, so a decision occasion comes along, and someone runs into your office and says, there's a fire in the bathroom on the second floor. Now, what do? Do you sit down and you read the tea leaves and consult 14 people? You say, pull the fire alarm. That's the decision. All right, you've scanned your choices, and you made the choice that's best suited to what you think has to be. That's mixed scanning. Now, you would think that mixed scanning would be the conventional way or the typical routine way people make decisions in a district. Not necessarily true, although it does make a difference, believe it or not, I think, between building and district. And district level, you have more opportunities to do mixed scanning because you have more time, usually have more time. My superintendent had a terrible root canal problem on 9/11, and the man was suffering, and he had an appointment to have it taken care of. I guess it had been an hour after the tragedy hit, and he didn't know what to do. I said, "Why don't you just go to the dentist?" I said, I'll take it for now, and I'll man the phones as such." And he said, "Okay." So he went. He was gone for a couple of hours before he was able to come back. And I was getting phone calls from half of the Western world, from most superintendents from everywhere, because no one knew what to do about this crisis. And, no sense revisiting that. It's horrible enough just even to consider it. And that was a matter of really of mixed scanning, really coming through the choices that you can recognize and choosing the one that's best aligned with your values. Okay. That's in opposition to, in comparison to, what buildings do. I'm taking the 9/11 example out of the picture for the moment. The building principals and chairs, for that matter, often don't have time to sit down and count the tea leaves and really scan their choices. So what they'll do is grab the first choice that worked yesterday. Even if that choice even though it may have worked yesterday, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work today. You're going to use that choice because it's worked before. Which means you perpetuate whatever it is that you've been doing. And there's some merit to that, but other times it's probably fails to miss the mark, misses the mark, I should say, to be successful over the long term. So that's called muddling along, just kind of doing what you did yesterday, handling how things come along, and that's decision making as such. Now, what I'm going to do is point out, when you have this slide, it's one slide. You have this slide on my screen, and you have it in one of your modules. So you're going to see it here, but you do have the very same slide to look at as soon as Bernardo finds it. No, we don't have it yet, so we're going to stop that share. And then we're going to go back to the desktop. I can't find it. Which means I got to go back into the bright space. May heavens. Talking to myself. Forgive me. There we go. Okay, now you see it. This is a Bernardo phrase. It's not, I actually made this phrase up. All right. I think I did anyway. And that would be our futures are the sum, S-U-M, of our decisions. Just think about it. Think about all the decisions you've made, whether to wear the red shoes or the blue shoes today, or whether to part your hair on the left side of your head or the other side of your head or no side, to ask someone to marry you or not, okay, or all of the decisions you ever had to make in your life. Research says that teachers make 300 decisions a day. Think about how boggling and stressful that is. Call on Johnny instead of on Mary instead of Johnny. You use this question rather than that question. All decisions. So this decision making is so fundamental to who we are. We often don't take the time to think about what a decision may look like. And this is a very, very linear, he shouted, left to right, Paris. And I'll end this video with this for you to consider as we move through the material. And again, within the context of culture. All right, so we'll take something quick. You have facts, information, and data that could lead to a goal or goals. The goals lead to choices. The choices require that you future them. You make the choices, but you make the choices based on your values and feelings. Hello, have you heard that a few times today? Let's do it again. I don't know if this sounds sexist, and I've used this a long time, but I'm not starting to wonder whether it's sexist. I'll try it one more time. If you think it's sexist, please tell me. I'll never use it again. Mary's crazy about Johnny. Or I can make a Johnny crazy about Mary. Doesn't matter. But let's go with Mary, junior high school, by the way. It's 8th grade context. Mary's crazy about Johnny, wants to go out with Johnny in a worse way. Johnny's, whatever. Johnny is some kind of guy. Well, Johnny is Johnny and Mary is Mary. They're 8th grade kids. So her goal is to go out with Johnny. What are her choices? Sometimes when I ask this question in a class, I get answers I don't like to put on the board nowadays, but I'm going to keep it pretty simple. One choice is to not ask Johnny out or to the dance or whichever. That's a choice. Do nothing. Another choice would be to ask him out. And another choice could be have her girlfriend, Judy, ask Johnny to go out with Mary. Those are all the kinds of soap opera things that happen in junior and middle schools, and sometimes in all sorts of contexts here and there. There are other choices, but let's go with those three. So my goal is to go out with Mary, with Johnny. These are my choices. Now let's hold off on the futuring piece for a minute and the choices piece. Let's go over the values and feelings. Let's future it. If what could happen if I do nothing? We may never go out. We may never, ever be romantically involved. That's an outcome. It's a probable outcome. It's a possible outcome and could be a probable outcome. What would happen if I ask him out? He may make fun of me. He may say no, hurt my feelings. He may say yes. What if I have my girlfriend ask him to ask her out? I'm getting my directions wrong, but you know where I'm taking you. Well, we all know that sometimes happens that Judy winds up going out with Johnny and Mary is left with a big problem, or maybe it would work. Now, what we're doing now is we're looking at the outcomes. We're looking at the probable futures. And then what we do is we weigh them against our feelings and our values. Maybe you've been raised to say that, you're not supposed to have somebody speak up for you in any kind of relationship. Maybe you are terrified of being hurt. Maybe you are fearful of rejection. Maybe you are super sensitive kind of person. So I don't know if I want to take the chance, even though I think there's a probable he might say yes. He could say no, and I don't want to put myself in that place. So what do I do about that? I mean, I'll go ask Sammy out instead, and maybe that's the way things should be. What goes on is we're talking about how a decision evolves between your ears. Any decision, I mean, if you decided to wear, green shoes instead of blue shoes today, you probably, well, don't put me into this pot. You probably picked the green shoes because the green shoes matched something else you were wearing. And that wouldn't work for me because I never know what matches with what. But if you're that kind of clothing conscious person, maybe it would be the case. Or if I decide to take this way home instead of that way home because one way is more scenic than the other, or one way is quicker than the other, and I want to save gas, that speaks to my values and feelings. Now let's take it to a COVID level. Let's go way out to the other side. COVID epidemic begins to emerge. Seems to be spreading like crazy across the country, across the world, around the world. Seems to be very deadly, or it seems to be, we don't know how to stop it. What's my goal? My goal is to protect the country. What are my choices? Do nothing. Make all people stay in their houses for the foreseeable future. Come up with restrictive measures where I can to limit the amount of exchange among people. Now, if we had done nothing, what would have been, we're looking back over our shoulders now, but and if you're in the middle of all this, if we had done nothing, what would have been the outcome? If we had restricted everyone into their homes for really, if you think about it, a year or 2 years before it began to at least show some signs of being taken care of abating, what would that have done? Or we could have come up with restrictive measures, which would have been painful, but may have at least slowed down the process until we got a chance to get ahead of it. Those are the three choices, or others clearly, but those are three basic choices for how the country and the world, for that matter, chose to meet that goal. Now, again, you can see how it all comes about. If I'm going to, let's skip over the values and feelings again. If my culture is, I got to have my businesses moving. We have to make money. We have to exchange goods. People need things. They can't, they're not self-sufficient. They don't got all the food they're ever going to need in their basement. So we got to keep the economy moving, and it may cost us some lives. I've got to keep the restrictions as minimal as I can. And by the same token, I think we have to figure out another way to educate kids. We can't make them let them come to school this way because we're going to just magnify the contagion. And so I make a choice as a leader to take, let's say, choice 3, even though you're not happy about it, but you realize that's the best to go with. Even though that may make some people pretty twisted about how you approach it, that's how you saw it. Let's drop back one more. Think about a choice well, I gave you a choice I made I didn't like, but early on in the video today about alternative high school. Becoming the assistant superintendent for instruction. Been in the district for quite a while. I pretty much know everything I need to know about the district, as well as the cultures pretty well, including the individual buildings, and especially the elementary school teachers and principals' responses to instruction. Dedicated people who want to do the right thing by kids, and will work in spite of their leadership, sometimes not giving them all of what they need. But extremely conservative. not politically. So I'm talking about conservative in their methodologies because they teach how they were taught, which, by the way, research confirms most teachers teach the way they were taught, or in rejection of the way they were taught. For the most part, the first choice is what research seems to substantiate. And so what they do is they're very comfortable with basal readers, basic reading texts, teachers' manuals, prescribed lessons, I should say. And they're comfortable with that. And the scores aren't bad. The scores are, average, pretty much. So we're not really hurting kids. We're doing okay with that. Then along comes Dr. Bernardo, who says, I don't know. To me, there's got to be something better. We can do better. We can do things more creatively. We can do things from a different perspective without throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So let's get a group of people together and let's see how we can really do our research, roll up our sleeves and learn what we need to learn to find what research is saying about the best approaches to reading and writing in the elementaries, and have it mushroom up to throughout the whole system if we over time. That's a decision I made. And it was in conflict with some values and feelings because some very conservative principals and teachers who weren't necessarily interested in learning something new after teaching for 30 years, in one way or in one way. That we weren't killing or smothering, but we were having it step aside in favor of newer ways to approach things. We can roll out lots of examples. Technology choices. Here's an upcoming decision. What do we do about ChatGPT? First of all, what's your goal? And secondly, what are your choices? Because that's shifting sands. That all comes from your understanding of how a decision gets made. Look at that Vroom Yatan material closely. In fact, I'm going to put a link up on that before I leave you. I'm going to give you a video to watch about Vroom-Yatan that will hopefully take you to the next place on that. And with that, I will stop and wish you well. I'm not sure when I'm putting this up. No later than Sunday, probably sometime today. Today's Wednesday.